And share source.
I don't know what the difference is for say open there.
Okay.
Maybe you can be a little louder. Is it possible? Oh.
All right, so we're going to cover two two different things tonight. First, of course, is the is a, so it's something on the parsha. This is our parsha shir. I don't want to gloss over that. Um, and this is a parsha that is frequently read in the week or weeks leading up to Purim. And there's a lot of interesting connections between the
Go to
parsha
your
and
room.
Purim,
Go to your room. Go on.
which I think we've covered some of those in the past, and we'll maybe explore slightly a different one tonight. But the real most of our time we're going to spend on more
No.
practical issues around Purim, which is this year we have the unique. Well, it's not so it happened during the pandemic, right? It happened in 21,
Pretty unique.
right? And it's not happening again, I think, for another 20 years or so.
Chandler, here.
So the situation when Purim falls on Erev Shabbos and how to meet one's halachic responsibilities
Chandler, here.
for Purim Suda and Shabbos
Here.
meal.
Here.
And
Not that we
Go
could
to
hear
your room.
everything.
I'm just going to
Go
mute him
to
for a
your room.
second. Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
All right. Okay. So what to do when Purim falls on Erev Shabbos, and what we're going to be offering in the shul as one approach, and give you some time to ponder whether you want to exercise that option or not, and then we'll see where everything goes from there. So Parshat Tetzaveh, continuing in the lengthy description of the Mishkan and its functioning. Tetzaveh is focused on the Kohanim, on the not so much the sacrifices that they offer, but the bigdei kahuna, the clothing that the Kohanim wore, is the main focus of the parsha. Some of the avoda, some of the work and the service that they did as well. It opens with the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. So a lot of nice thoughts about the menorah are brought in this week's parsha in the commentators. But a really interesting, intriguing idea, which we've touched on. I can't remember if we spoke about it in the parsha shir, but certainly in shul I've touched on this point, is that Parshat Tetzaveh is the only parsha from his birth till the end. Well, Sefer Devarim is a little bit more complicated, but basically is the only parsha where Moshe's name is not mentioned. From the time that from his birth in Parshat Shmot till the end of the Torah, again in Sefer Devarim, because Moshe is the author of Sefer Devarim, it's written in the first person, not quite following the same grammatic rules, but this is the only time where Moshe's name is not mentioned explicitly. And so there's a lot of different explanations for why that is. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of them. And note that there is a very strong tie. Again, I want to make sure that we leave time to discuss the practical halachic issues. So I'm not going to delve deeply into it, but there is a very deep connection between the absence of Moshe's name and Megillat Esther. What's that connection?
Hashem. Hashem's not
Right.
there.
So
Benahafachu.
Megillat Esther is, of course, is all about God's intervening and directing and pulling the strings, but God is not mentioned. Throughout the Megillat Esther, we never find the name of God. And again, all sorts of explanations are offered for this, right? There's a very strong minhag that when we write a Megillah, we're supposed to, each column, right? It's written, you can see the column. So each column is supposed to begin with the word melech or hamelech, king. And that, of course, is a reference to Hashem. there's all sorts of interesting symbolic ways that the Megillah story is read to put God in back into the story in one way or another. But the name Esther comes from, the Gemara tells us, Hastarat Panim, Anochi Haster Aster et Panai. God tells the Jewish people that when we fail to obey his words, that God will hide himself from us. And so it's a story of Hastarat Panim. It's a story of God's hiddenness, the hiddenness of God's face. And so the absence of God's name doesn't mean that God is absent. It means that God is hidden and God is operating behind the scenes. And again, there's a lot of different ways that this is taken, a lot of different ways to elaborate on it. But fundamentally, that it's a very powerful reminder to us about God's active role in the unfolding of human history and human drama, even if we don't always perceive it or see it. And number two, specifically Megillat Esther, which is a story about a Jewish community in exile and diaspora. And so how we experience and relate to God in the diaspora outside of the land of Israel is, in a more hidden way. And that's just the reality. And so the absence of God's name drives that point home. Again, there's many, many, many other connections, but we're going to leave it at that and just go to offer a few insights into why Moshe's name is missing from Parshat Tetzaveh and what that might teach us. The first and probably the most common, popular explanation comes from the Baal HaTurim, who says that when Bnei Israel sin with the Chet HaEgel and God wants to destroy them, Moshe is pleading on their behalf, and he's saying, please don't destroy them, please save them, please don't do anything horrible. And Moshe says, if you don't listen to me, then I want no part to do with this either. Mecheni nami sifracha. Erase me from the book, Moshe says to God. So the Baal HaTurim says that Lo hiskir Moshe b'zeh haseder, masha inkim b'chol hachumash shemisha shenolad Moshe, ein seder shelo huzkar ba. Right, Moshe is not mentioned in this parsha. Unlike any other parsha from the time of his birth, Moshe is always mentioned at least once. Hatam mishum she'amar mecheni nami sifracha. The reason is because Moshe said to God in next week's parsha, erase me from the book, misifracha asher katavta, from the book, from the Torah that you wrote. V'kilalat chacham afilu al tnai ba'av nitkaim bazeh. And once Moshe utters these words of curse, these bad words, it has to come to fruition in one way or another, right? Moshe is a Navi, Moshe is a prophet. So once he says it, there has to be some validity to what he said. And so this is where it plays itself out in this parsha. He doesn't get into why specifically this parsha, but he does he says that it's for that reason. The Gemara in Zvachim brings this parsha, brings this the idea also when Moshe refuses, right? When Moshe originally refuses God's mission to go speak to Paro, it says Vayichar af Hashem b'Moshe. God got angry at Moshe. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer Kol Charon af Shabbator Ne'amar Bo Roshem V'zeh Lo Ne'amar Bo Roshem. Right? Every time it says that God gets anger, there's some fallout to God's anger. Something happens as a result of God being angry. Except for this time, we don't see any consequence, any punishment, and any ill effect of God's anger when God gets angry at Moshe's initial refusal. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer Av Zeh Ne'amar Bo Roshem. No, he says this also has some lingering effect. Shene'amar lo Aaron achicha Levi v'lo Kohenu. Right, as it says, right, when God finally convinces Moshe to go to Paro, because he says that Aaron will go with you. Aaron will be your spokesperson. Aaron is described as Aaron Achicha Halevi, the Levi. So, right, and say, wait a second, what do you mean Aaron Halevi? Aaron a Kohen. We all know that Aaron is a Kohen. What do you mean that Aaron Halevi? Hachi Kamar, Ani Amarti Ata Kohen V'hu Levi, Achshav Hu Kohen V'ata Levi. So God says originally the plan was for Moshe not only to be Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe the prophet and Moshe the great leader, but also Moshe HaKohen. and Aaron was going to be in the supporting role. But because Moshe initially refused God's mission, so then roles are reversed, and Aaron becomes the Kohen, and Moshe takes the role of Levi. And so that might be so right. So specifically in our parsha, which is the first one that singles out the role of the Levium, the special role of the Levium in the Mishkan, this is where Moshe is absent. This is Moshe's punishment, where he's really driving home the point to him that no, Moshe, you're the Levi because you initially refused. Okay, so that's and again, this is there's some commentators who spell this out more explicitly, but we're not giving this a full treatment tonight. Rabbi Sachs takes it in the exact opposite direction. Rabbi Sachs says that if we look at brotherly relationships in the Torah, and I think last week someone in our shir made this exact point. I can't remember who it was, but I think someone mentioned this, that throughout Sefer Breshit, brothers don't get along with each other very well, right? Brothers, it's not so good. Doesn't give a nice example. But Rabbi Sachs says when it comes to Moshe and Aaron, we see the exact opposite. Maybe we can point to Ephraim and Menashe at the end of Sefer Breshit as maybe having a good brotherly relationship. A little unclear. They also have the reversal of who gets the Bechorah. But when it comes to Moshe and Aaron, all we see is love and support and respect that one has for the other. So, pointing to the same episode that the Gemara in Zvachim used to show that Moshe is being punished, Rabbi Sachs notes and says, no, this is Aaron showing his absolute support for Moshe. We would think that Aaron might be jealous, right? Aaron's the older brother. He's been suffering with the Jewish people in Egypt while Moshe has been away, right? According to most, he's been away for 40 years, maybe. It's been a long time since he ran away. He never really suffered. He never was enslaved, right? It would seem, who's Moshe to come on the scene now and say that he's going to be the one to save the Jewish people? But no, Aaron goes out and he's happy and he hugs Moshe and he greets him and he parades him back and he goes with Paro. And so Rabbi Sachs says that perhaps our parsha is showing Moshe's reciprocity of that Moshe is now showing his deep love and respect for Aaron. That even though Moshe is the great Moshe Rabbeinu, the great prophet, the great leader, he is happy for Aaron that Aaron gets to take on this leadership role in this ritualistic role, and so Moshe steps back and gives Aaron the spotlight for this parsha. It's a beautiful idea, a beautiful thought. And finally, we have the idea of the Alshich, who says that Moshe's name is not mentioned, but Moshe is addressed several times, right? If you go to the beginning of the parsha, I was moving too quickly, right? In just the first 5 psukim or so, the word atah, you, just listen to how many times the word you appears here. V'atah tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael v'ikchu elecha shemen zayit zach katit la'maor la'alot ner tamid v'ohel moed michutz la'parochet asher al edut yaroch oto Aaron uvanav me'erev ad boker lifnei Hashem chukat olam l'dortam me'et b'nei Yisrael v'atah hakriv elecha et Aaron achicha v'banav v'ito mitoch b'nei Yisrael l'chano li Aaron adav v'avil l'azar v'tamar b'nei Aaron v'asita b'gdei kodesh l'Aaron achicha l'chavod l'tifaret V'atah titaber al kol chachmei lev asher mileitiv ruach chochma v'asut b'gdei Aaron l'kadsho l'chano li. The word atah is there a lot. So the Alshich said again, okay, there's reasons why Moshe's name might not be mentioned, but if God wants to talk to Moshe, why does normal, the normal style is that the Torah tells us Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe, right? Not in the second person. So why is it switching, and why is this emphasis seemingly on atah? So the Alshich says, I'll show you the English and I'll read a little bit in the Hebrew. Zotia kavanat aktuvim v'hu ki hine. Okay. Acharei wrote Moshe kol ma'aseh hamishkan ki norahu la'asot lo mikdash lishkon elokim b'tochenu. Moshe sees that there's this project of the Mishkan and how amazing it is that God is going to dwell among the Jewish people. ויצוות עמו יקחו לו תרומה ואל בצלו ואליהו וכל איש חכם לי ועשות ארון ומנורה ושולחן וכל כלי המשכן ואוהלו מכסהו. And Moshe gives the command to everyone to bring gifts and to Betzalel and Oholiav, the craftspeople, and to make the menorah and the shulchan and the all the different vessels, all the different kelim of the Mishkan. And the command for Aaron and his sons to serve as Kohanim. Moshe is naturally going to feel jealousy, and he's going to feel upset and say, "What is God doing to me? I have no part in the Mishkan," is what Moshe might think, or is what the Alshech thinks Moshe is thinking. Umagam hu haya ati liot kohen v'aron levi v'nechalafa davar b'slichut mitzvayim, right? And also adding the Gemara that we saw, that right, Moshe was originally supposed to be the kohen, and now he's lost it. So Moshe's jealousy and feeling of exclusion is even stronger. Al kain v'daber al libo u'lenachamo ba Elokim. So the Alshich says that God, in using and addressing Moshe directly in the Atah, is coming to offer comfort to Moshe. Amar Atah, Ma'agam betam sha'amilat ve'atah kimagbiya kol ve'omer ve'atah Moshe al tachush. Right. So God's emphasizing, you, Moshe, don't worry, don't be upset. Ki chelkecha gadol mikulam, because your part. It might not feel that way to you right now, but really your part and your role is greater than anyone else's. Because you're the one who's going to complete this whole process. Because it's only by you giving them the mitzvah that they'll know what to do and that the Mishkan will come into being. Right? They'll take the oil to you. And by that, then there will be the Ner Tamid, the eternal flame, right? So he's saying that the emphasis on Atah is Moshe, you also have a part. Even though you may be more behind the scenes and you may feel that you're not as actively involved, your part is just as good as not, if not greater than everyone else, right? It's very similar to what we find with when Aaron is told in Parashat Ba'alotcha, when Aaron's told to light the candles. So Rashi notes that this follows immediately at the end of Parashat Naso, where we read about the all the Nesiim, all the tribal leaders who were offering their sacrifices as part of the Chanukah HaMizbeach, or of the Chanukah HaMishkan, as part of the dedication of the Mishkan, and Aaron was very upset because he saw he had no part in it. So God tells him, "No, Aaron, you have a greater role because you have an eternal mitzvah of lighting the menorah, which is going to last for many more generations." Cheryl, I think we're getting a loop from you, Cheryl.
Yeah. Is it better?
Yes, I think.
I'll mute myself.
Yeah, I'm still hearing some feedback. Okay, yeah, there we go. If you have a question, you can let us know. So the Alshach says that this also is coming to give some comfort to Moshe, and right there's a whole midrashic tradition. Again, if this was just the parsha shir tonight, there's fascinating midrashim that talk about Moshe's being upset, Moshe's being feeling excluded, feeling jealous, right? So on the one hand, this emphasizes Moshe's humanity, and Moshe, right? Moshe is just like the rest of us. He gets angry, he gets upset, he has those feelings of betrayal and exclusion, and so that, right, the fact that he overcomes them is great, and some other beautiful, some other ideas. But anyway, that's the parsha really in a nutshell for tonight. It's just the idea, that there's so many different explanations for why Moshe's name doesn't appear. We looked at 3 of them. There are many, many more. I'll pause if there are any thoughts or questions on this piece before we transition to the more explicit Purim piece. And yeah, you have to unmute. And you have to unmute yourself, Anne. You see it, Ann? We can't hear you yet. Should be a little microphone somewhere.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
Sorry.
Technical issue solved.
Okay, so there's this oneness between them. That's such a beautiful way of setting it up this way you did with contrasting and all in Rabbi Sachs's point. There is something else though that goes together with the menorah, and that's the lighting of the incense.
Right.
And that is the way for all of us to be at one. And also with that, Moshe is the one to whom they bring the spices. They bring the ingredients for similarly to what is discussed here. And I was just thinking that to really tap into that oneness, the rabbis have given us a formal way of praying the Shema every day, and also the Amida, which has a kind of oneness with Hashem, which we can feel so strongly. We are all saying the same words, even though we may have, of course, other feelings and other emphases as we go through. But by the time we've come through the Amida, that special feeling of oneness. So even though we really miss the incense, perhaps because it is a mode of being one together, we have found other ways to do it. And therefore, tonight, the Shema and the Amida are precious to us too, So
okay.
That's I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you.
All right, Yoshiko, thank you. Any other questions or reactions to what we've seen? Okay, so we'll move on to a discussion of Purim. Purim on Erev Shabbos. Okay, so the real question is about the Seuda of Purim, about the Purim meal. And I debated where to start this conversation, but I think I'm going to start with number 3, even though obviously if I put it as 3, at some point I had a thought that number 1 and 2 should come first, but we'll come back to this. So number 3 is talking about Erev Shabbos in general, right? So this is the Shulchan Aruch, section 249, talking about Hilchot Shabbos, or Hilchot Erev Shabbos, really, laws of Erev Shabbos. Asur likbor be'erev Shabbat seuda mishteh she'enu ragil b'yamei hachol. So on Erev Shabbos, one is forbidden to make a meal or a mishteh, a party, a celebration, a feast, which you're not accustomed to make during the rest of the week. Afilu hu seudat erusin, even a meal for celebrating a wedding, right? Again, maybe it's an engagement party, maybe it's actually a wedding feast. The Gemara talks about how they would schedule weddings on Friday, so they would only have to pay for one festive meal and not pay for also a Shabbos meal. So but right, our practice is we don't make weddings on Erev Shabbos generally. And the reason is mipnei kvod HaShabbat, because we're concerned about the honor, the kavod of Shabbos. Sheikanes l'Shabbat keshehu ta'ev le'echol. Right, a person should go into Shabbos hungry. Shabbos meal should be the highlight of the week. Shouldn't be the Friday afternoon, pre-game. That's not what we look forward to all week. We should be looking forward to the Friday night Shabbos meal. Right? So the entire day is included in this. Okay, so you might think, okay, I could have a big lavish breakfast. By the time, that's not going to mess up my appetite. But if it's going to mess with your appetite, so even a big breakfast could be problematic. The Rama adds, Sudash is mana be'erev Shabbos kagon bri mila opinion arben mutar. If there's a meal which is halachically mandated to be on Erev Shabbos, such as a bris, such as a pidyon haben, of course that would be allowed, right? You don't not have a bris because it's Erev Shabbos. You don't hold back on the simcha of a bris because it's Erev Shabbos. And he says this should be obvious. ולאכול ולשתות בלי כפיות סעודה, אפילו סעודה שרגיל בה בכל כל היום מותר להתחיל מן הדין, right? But to eat and drink without making it formally a meal, right? I'll have um, I'll have my steak and fries and and chips, but I won't have bread, so it's not going to be a seuda, right? To do that, um, mutar latchil min hadin. You're allowed to do so from the strict law. Aval mitzvah lihimanea milikvar seuda shenahug ba bechol mitet shot b'mala. But you should withhold, and certainly later in the day, right? So he says from 9 hours, again, 9 halachic hours. So if the day is divided into 12, right? The daytime is 12 hours. So 9 hours, if sunrise is 6 a.m. and sunset is 6 p.m. So from 3 p.m. onwards, you certainly should refrain from having any significant meal. And then in the next section, the Shulchan Aruch says,
Can I pause you just for a second? I found that interesting. So that's interesting, right? That you're permitted to do it, but it's a mitzvah to. Okay, just wanted to note that. Maybe we'll come back to it.
That is an interesting, very ironic. So anyway, so then he says derech anshe maseh litanot b'chol erev Shabbos, right? So people who are from, I guess is how we can translate anshe maseh. People who are meticulous have the custom even to fast on erev Shabbos. We generally don't fast on erev Shabbos because then we're afraid that we're gonna eat the Shabbos meal not because we want a Shabbos meal, but just because we're starving. Right? Asar b'teves can fall on erev Shabbos, but generally we don't fast, but we certainly don't have big meals, right? Many people even from chatzot, from halachic noon, will not. This always causes some tension. Can you? When I was learning in yeshiva, so the highlight of the week was to go away for Shabbos, but part of that wasn't just the family that's going to host you for Shabbos, but it was Friday afternoon to go into town and to hit up the falafel stores or whatever on Ben Yehuda Street. So it's a question: can you really do that? Can you? And so some people would go and make sure to get their falafel, their pizza, or their burgers before halachic noon. So then they would, but anyway, so there's a real concern with eating a substantial meal on erev Shabbos. Of course, right? The Ramah tells us Suda shezmana erev Shabbos. If it's right, not only a bris but if the calendar says this is the 14th of Adar, it's Purim. There's a mitzvah to have a Suda, so that would certainly be one of those instances where you're allowed to and even required to do it. But we also have to be sensitive. We don't want to be mizalzel Shabbos. We don't want to take away from Shabbos. So now, if we go back to sources 1 and 2, which is the Shulchan Aruch on Hilchos Purim, let me just show you the English. Begins the Ramah. Okay, we'll pick up with the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so he begins with discussion about is there a requirement, the whole question about chayav inish lipsume b'paraya, a person's supposed to drink or become intoxicated. We're not going to really get into that, although that does come up also, and we'll touch on it a little bit later. Okay, then the Ramah. The second time it says Ramah over here. Right, so first Ramah says one way to fulfill this is not that you have to get totally hammered, but that you just drink enough that you take a nap. You take a nap, so while you're sleeping, you don't know the difference because you're dead to the world. You're totally out of it. So then you can't. If someone asks you while you're sleeping, tell me the difference between Haman and Mordechai, you won't be able to answer that. Okay. Then he says, Ainli tanot bePurim, you're not allowed to fast on Purim. Yesh nahagu lebosh bigdei Shabbos v'yom tov bePurim. Some have the custom to not wear costumes, but to wear nice clothing on Purim. V'noagim lasot sudat Purim la'achar mincha. So the normal custom, according to the Ramah, is to make the Purim Seuda, not in a Friday situation, but in every year, to make the Purim Seuda in the afternoon, after Mincha, the Arvit Yitpalel Balayla, and then you should daven Mariv at night after the Seuda. Mitpalalim Mincha Techila Ba'od Hayom Gadol, and you should daven Mincha while, before you begin the meal. Rov HaSeuda Tzarich Liyot Biyom. Majority of the meal should be eaten during the daytime and not schedule the meal to start 2 minutes before sunset. So technically you begun on Purim, but not so much. We're going to change the clocks this year before Purim, but if the clocks weren't changed, so it'd be a lot easier for people working to make the meal as late as possible. But you shouldn't do that. It really should be a Purim meal and not a Motzei Purim meal. Right? And Rama says, even in his day, a lot of people would make it at night and would make it their dinner, and it would go into the nighttime, and that's really not ideal. And then here we go. Purim b'yom shishi. When Purim falls on Friday, yasu hasuda b'shacharit mishum kavod Shabbos. They should make the meal in the morning because of the concern of kavod Shabbos that we just saw. If you make the meal in the afternoon, then you'll have no appetite for a Shabbos meal afterwards. And he says, every year, if you want to make the meal in the morning, you can. Even if Purim falls on a Tuesday, you can do the meal in the daytime. But the general minhag is to do it at night, towards the evening. The Mishnah Berurah in the next source says part of that is because there's other mitzvot of the day that you should take care of before you get consumed in your own seuda, your own enjoyment, specifically the mitzvah of mishloach manot and matanot levyonim. Make sure that others have capacity to make their own seuda before you're enjoying yours. So you should do that in the morning, and that's why we generally do it in the afternoon. But if you want to have a nice festive Purim breakfast or brunch, you're certainly welcome to do so. Okay, so we can skip this part. Okay, we can stop with that. Okay, so the Ramah surfaces the tension that arises when Purim falls on Friday, that we have a mitzvah for Purim meal, but we also have to make sure we're going to have a nice Shabbos meal. His suggestion is that specifically in this year, that it would be best to make your Purim Seuda in the morning. Anyone who wants to do so is certainly welcome. I'm sure Goldberg's will be very popular this coming Purim on in the morning after Megillah reading. You're certainly welcome to do. You're certainly welcome to do that, and that might be even ideal for those who rely on the falling asleep to take care of the requirements or non-requirements of not knowing the difference between Haman and Mordechai. So that should, you can't really fall asleep later in the day leading into Shabbos. So that also, that might play into it as well. Okay, so we have this fundamental tension. And the question is, so what does one do? And I'll add to that, right? I think I skipped over it, but the Shulchan Aruch also says that. I think it's in the Mishnah Berurah.
You just
Speak now.
In the Mishnah Berurah, number 2.
I'll call you everything.
Um,
I'll call you in a bit. Okay. All right. Bye. Bye, Dad.
Okay. The Mishnah Berurah number when it says 9 over here, with a lot of time left in the day, right? Make sure it's not too close. That you're not doing it too close to nighttime. That it really should be a Purim meal and not a day after Purim meal. Katav Eliyahu Rabbah b'shem Shlah Meshubach Misha Oseh Seuda b'Shacharit v'Katav Od. Okay, so right, the Eliyahu Rabbah says that it's actually preferable to make the meal every year to make the meal in the morning, in order to avoid any confusion, any issue of it spilling over into the next day. V'Katav Od shikabetz anshe beito v'chavera d'efshar lismoach k'ra'ui b'yachid. But he also says that you should make sure that this is a meal that's being enjoyed with friends and family. And because you're not going to have the same level of simcha if you're eating by yourself than if you're eating with people that you love and care about. And so, where the norm has become And this is one of the nice things our shul has done over the years is to have a communal Sudas Purim with friends and family. So, that's harder to do on a Friday when there's some kids have to be in school and some parents have to be at work and people are getting ready for Shabbos. So that also has to figure into the picture, into one's calculations. I'm moving a little quickly. Are there any questions on what we've seen so far? Okay, so if not, we'll move on to the Gemara in Psachim. The Gemara in Psachim tells us, so the Mishnah begins, Erev Psachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. On Erev Pesach, we're not talking about Shabbos, we're talking about Erev Pesach. Samuch lemincha, in the afternoon, lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. You shouldn't eat anything in the afternoon until it becomes dark, until it's the Seder. Right, again, because we want to be sure that you have a proper appetite for the mitzvot associated with the Seder. Afilu anisha b'Yisrael lo yochal ad she'yetzev. Even a poor person should hold off on eating until they sit down for the Seder. Okay, then skip to the Gemara. My irei arvei psachim afilu arvei shabbatot ve'yamim tovim nami. Why does the Mishnah say only on Erev Pesach a person shouldn't eat in the afternoon? It's true every week of the year on Erev Shabbos. You shouldn't eat close to the afternoon. You want to make sure that you have a proper appetite. And same on Erev Yontif. Titania, as it's taught, Lo yochal adam ba'arvei Shabbatot ve'yamim tovim min hamincha lemala kedei she'yikanes l'Shabbat keshehu ta'ava. As it says, a person should not eat on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yontif from the mincha. There's a great lot of discussion about what's meant when it says min hamincha. Does it mean halachic noon? Does it mean the 9th hour? Does it mean some other time? Sometime towards evening, towards the late afternoon, you shouldn't eat in order that you'll have a proper appetite for the mitzvah meal that's going to follow. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, ochel v'holech ad shetechshach. Rabbi Yossi says, nope, if you're eating, we don't want to ever stop anyone from eating. Keep eating until it becomes dark. And then there's a whole lot of discussion and trying to parse out these two positions. Again, we don't have time for all of this, but now we go to several lines further down. I'm not sure where exactly in the English we are. I'm just going to keep in the Aramaic. U'maaseh Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, shayibesubim ba'ako v'kidesh aleim hayom. So it once happened that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi were enjoying each other's company with a meal in Akko. Probably they were eating hummus, because that's what I think you eat in Akko. And kidesh aleim hayom, it became Shabbos. They didn't know what to do. Amarle Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yossi, bar Rabbi Ritzoncha nafsik v'nechus l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda chavirenu. So one of them says, okay, we've seen these two positions. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to eat once it becomes Shabbos. You have to stop what you were doing. So let's show respect for Rabbi Yehuda and stop eating. Amarlo. He says back to them, B'chol yom v'yom atam mechabev dvarai lifnei Rabbi Yehuda. Says you always paskin like me when I'm in disagreement with Rabbi Yehuda. Now you want to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? Ma pitom, right? Follow, be consistent, and I'd say you don't have to fast. And it's interesting because he quotes a pasuk from Megillat Esther. So are you trying to capture the king, the queen, while I'm in the house? That's what Achashverosh says to Haman when he falls on Esther's couch, begging for his life once she outs herself as a Jew. Amarle imkain lo nafsus. He says, if that's the case, okay, we won't stop. We won't be concerned for Rabbi Yehuda. Shema Yugotamidim v'ikru halacha ledorot. We don't want the students to get the wrong impression about what the proper thing to do. Amar, Amru lo zazami shama chekava halacha Rabbi Yossi. So it seems like we're passing like Rabbi Yossi that you don't have to stop. Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. But now the Gemara tells us. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Ein halacha lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is really not like either of them. You don't have to stop the meal. You don't continue the meal as if nothing's happened once Shabbos begins. Ella pores mapa umekadesh. Rather, what you should do if you find yourself caught in the middle of the meal and then Shabbos begins is you should be pores mapa umekadesh. Spread out a tablecloth, say kiddush, and then continue your meal. So that's the a third possibility. That's another possibility that we have is this idea of paris mapa umekadesh. Before we get into the technicalities of it, it's worth noting that a right, this is not said in the context of Purim leading into Shabbos. This is said anytime, right? In theory, this is a possibility someone could do the entire year. And there's a lot of discussion about whether that is in fact the case or whether this is only in a situation where there's some mitzvah or some other pressing reason why you were eating so close to the onset of Shabbos or Yontif. But that's a side again. That's a side issue. Um, and then there's a great debate about whether this is really what a person can do or whether this is if you happen to find yourself in this less than ideal situation, you're invited to someone's house and they start feeding you the big meal and it would be disrespectful to refuse it. So then what do you do when Shabbos begins, right? Is this something that one can plan to do from the outset, or is this if you find yourself in this less than ideal situation, here's a way that you can properly deal with it, but not to set that out. So, as is always the case, there are some who say that this is a bidi evet situation, this is a less than ideal, and this is not something that one should plan on doing from the get-go. But just one, Rev Herschel Schachter, leading Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshiva University, says exactly that. And we heard that there was some in Jerusalem whose custom was that when Purim was on Friday, they spread a cloth and made kiddush. This is brought in the Magen Avraham for the Mordechai. It is a difficult custom, for in the simple read, the entire matter of spread a cloth and make kiddush is bidi evet, is less than ideal. If this happened, so that's what you do. But it is not right to set this up lechatchila. Okay, you shouldn't plan on doing this. As Rav Schechter, whole camp of poskim who say this is less than ideal, right? The Rama already told us a Purim falls on Friday. You should have your meal in the morning, so then you'll have time to digest and you'll have proper time to get ready and have a proper appetite for Shabbos. The Meiri, one of the leading Rishons, says the exact opposite. And we as well, and our ancestors, when Purim is on Friday, we customarily start the meal while it is still day until after the day is sanctified, and right, start it and continue the meal through the beginning of Shabbos. We spread a cloth, recite Kiddush, and finish the meal. You mentioned Purim in it for this reason, for even the 15th had a miracle, right? Extending, you can always extend a Yontif, a Shabbos meal, but certainly Purim, where the 15th of Adar is when they celebrate Purim in Yerushalayim. The 15th of Adar is still very much connected to Purim, so it's even less of a question to extend it beyond. Logically, we should mention Purim, even though, okay, Meiri says it was his custom to do this. It seems that there's a prevalent custom specifically in Eretz Yisrael that this is what they do. And so we have a school of thought that says that this is not only acceptable, but this is actually preferred. Why would it be preferred? So again, it, might very well be a financial situation that it would be burdensome on communities to have an expectation for 2 fancy meals in the same day. That might be asking too much of many Jewish communities during our history. Thank God that's not a concern for most in our day and age. Making 2 festive meals might be difficult on the stomach, might be difficult on our appetite, but thankfully we're able to afford it. But that it might be that. It might be that they were trying to find the ideal way to involve and have a communal gathering, and that a communal gathering, again, different in the time of the Meiri, but we can certainly understand how it's more convenient for people to come together later in the day and do that, right? Certainly, if there's a big emphasis on Friday night Shabbos meals, um, I've heard many rabbis this year saying that there's lots of people who might not really know of a Purim Seudah and might not, and so encouraging this will give them an opportunity to make a Purim Seudah as well as a Shabbos meal. So there's lots of reasons why this might be the preferred way. Just add to it that one of the reasons we glossed over it, but one of the concerns about starting a meal on Friday late in the afternoon in general is that it might interfere with one Shabbos preparations. But if one is really leading their Purim Seudah into the Shabbos Seudah, so then presumably you're already ready for Shabbos, right? So that it's not going to interfere with that.
Time.
Yeah. Um, so so that's that's the general idea, is that we have an option presented in the Gemara, verified in Rishonim, that we can do this Pores Mapa Umekadesh. And when we consider all the other factors, it might be a very, it certainly can be a lechatchila. It certainly can be an ideal way to meet one's halachic responsibilities for the day. And so that's an option on the table. That's what we decided. The board decided would be, again, the best way to strike a balance for what our shul has done and wants to do. And so now we're already a little bit late, but just to run through the mechanics of how this works. So the basic is that one begins their meal, right, and it's a seuda. So the seuda is with bread. One should wash and say hamotzi. This is when it's still light out. This is right. We're starting at 6 o'clock at the shul. One should wash. If one generally drinks wine or alcohol during their Purim Seudah, they should do that during the first half of the meal while it's still light out, and not be worried about what I have responsibility for Kiddush later in the meal or when Shabbos begins. No, don't take away from your Simchas Purim at all. Don't take away from it. When Shabbos begins, so then we do this Pores Mapa. We spread a tablecloth, we cover bread. So even though we've already washed, we've already said hamotzi, we should have two whole challahs available that are covered. Um, let's just talk the meal mechanics first, and then we'll add in how davening fits into the picture. From the meal mechanics, one covers up two whole loaves of bread. We're not going to say hamotzi on that bread because we've already said hamotzi at the beginning of the meal. But again, everyone associates Shabbos meal with the two loaves of bread. So we're going to cover the bread and have that at least as a visual that it's now Shabbos. One is going to say Kiddush. But I just told you if you normally drink wine on Purim, then you should drink wine. And you're going to say Yabori Pirgafen when you drink your first cup of wine. You can't not say Yabori Pirgafen. One does not need to say Kiddush al Hayayin, al Hakos. Right? The Gemara is very clear. If you don't have wine, say Kiddush on Hamotzi. Say it on bread. If you don't have wine, you could still say the bracha of Kiddush, right? Having a cup of wine adds to the significance, to the chashivus of that bracha, as with many other brachot. But you don't need to have a cup of wine in order to say Kiddush. You can say the bracha of Mekadesh Shabbat without saying Bori Pirgav. So that's what one does if one has had wine already as part of the meal before Shabbos begun. If one didn't drink wine during the first half, then they can say Kiddush with Bori Pirgafen in a communal setting. If there is one or more people in the community who didn't drink wine as part of the Purim part of the meal, they can say Kiddush on behalf of those who did. There's no problem with me answering Amen to someone else's bracha of Bori Pirgafen, even if I'm not obligated to say it for myself. So that's what to do. right? I saw some interesting questions. Should one person be makpi to not drink wine when it's Purim before Shabbos begins in order that a proper Kiddush be said? The answer was no. The answer is that this is a proper Kiddush. If no one has an obligation to make a bracha of Bor Pirgafen, then a proper Kiddush is to say the bracha of Kiddush without Bor Pirgafen. And right, another reason why some people really like this is because it's cool. It's different, right? We get into such a routine, and it's a beautiful routine. But sometimes to shake things up and to exercise these less common practices is interesting, and it's an educational opportunity, right? I venture to say that that most of us have never been at a Shabbos meal where Kiddush was said without Bori Pirgafel. Sometimes if you're traveling, there's not kosher wine available, maybe in that situation. But it's an interesting educational opportunity to see that you don't always need to have Bori Pirgafel. So that's okay. So then you continue with the meal, right? You slice the two whole loaves of challah that were there, and you distribute them, and then you continue the meal
without hamotzi.
As you were without because you've already said hamotzi when the meal
Right. No,
began.
I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, correct. Without hamotzi. Right. There's an interesting question then about the end of the meal. So this is both a Purim meal and a Shabbos meal. So what insertions does one say or not say in benching? Right? Does one say al hanisim? Does one say ritzeh? So there's a general debate in the Gemara about do the insertions Birkat Hamazon follow when the meal began or when the meal ended? We generally follow when the meal began. However, Shabbos, we have a notion of Tosefet Shabbos. You can add on to Shabbos. You can start Shabbos early. So it's not improper to say Ritzeh for a Shabbos meal that begins early. So everyone agrees that in this situation you would say Ritzeh. And that fundamentally, most poskim agree you should say Al Hanisim as part of benching in the meal situation. Are there any questions on what we've said so far?
Yeah, can I start drinking earlier than my Suda?
Can you start drinking? You're welcome to do whatever you want. I mean, again,
I'm just wondering, like, is the drinking connected to the Suda? Is it?
Most assume it's connected to the Suda, yes.
Okay.
I mean, many have the practice that would say differently.
Yeah, for sure. But that's also during the week.
Right. L'chol hadeos, there's no mitzvah on Purim to drink on Purim night. Right? There's no mitzvah of Seuda. Again, people do it. I've done it from time to time. But don't think that that's part of what the Gemara is talking about. That's just having a good time. So if you're someone who likes to drink, whatever, go ahead. But there's specifically at the Purim meal.
So if we have our Seuda in the morning, we make motzi, but we don't make kiddush.
Correct. There's no kiddush for Purim. I mean, there are people who've written Purim kiddushes, but that's not a halachic requirement.
Okay.
Right. If you're having your Seuda in the morning, if you're having your Seuda when Purim's on Tuesday, there's no kiddush. But if you're drinking wine, you say Bor Pirgafen like you always do.
Okay.
And then you would, when it's your Shabbos meal, of course, you would say kiddush with wine and make hamotzi as you do every Shabbos. Okay, so that's with the meal. But then the question is, so there's two complicating factors that have to be discussed. Number one is, what about davening? So most poskim agree that one cannot daven Kabbalat Shabbat after. Well, so drunk is a different question.
Okay.
But one cannot, one Kabbalat Shabbat has to be said before the Shabbos meal. So Mariv, there's more flexibility. Mariv, you can have your Shabbos meal and then daven Mariv. But Kabbalat Shabbat, no. And add to that, when you're in a shul setting where some people might want to come to shul to daven and rely on the minyan in the shul, but not necessarily be participating in the shul seudah. So what we're going to do is we are going to stop when we stop our seudah because it's time for Shabbos. Anyone who wants to is welcome to light Shabbos candles at that point, and we're going to daven Kabbalat Shabbat, and we're going to daven Maariv. We're going to daven again. Part of that is the concern that people that rely on the shul for a minyan that aren't participating in the seudah. And there's also a discussion. I mean, there's different opinions about what's appropriate or not appropriate. So, so we're going to daven Kabbalat Shabbat and Maariv. Once you daven Maariv, then you've really halachically accepted Shabbos. And even though your meal is a continuation from what started beforehand, the feeling among almost all poskim is once you daven Maariv, then you've cut out the possibility of Al Hanisim, at least in its proper place. So we're not going to say Al Hanisim in the Amidah of Maariv, and we're not going to say Al Hanisim in the benching at the end of the meal, even though the meal began on Purim. There are those who say that if you forget Al Hanisim in its proper place, you can say it as part of the Harachamans at the end of benching, and that you could do Al Hanisim then also. And I'm going to put that out there as an option for people to do in shul. But if you're at home, if you've davened Kabbalat Shabbat and Maariv before finishing your meal, you should not say Al Hanisim. If you just said Kabbalat Shabbat, or you're at a family meal, you didn't daven at all, you can certainly, and perhaps should, certainly say Al Hanisim as part of the benching, even though the meal is concluding on Shabbos. Avi asked the question, well, what if you've drunk during the beginning of the meal before Shabbos begins? So one of my favorite halachot, I liked this halach a lot more when I was a college student than when I was the rabbi attending to the drunk college students. Rav Kook said that part of the mitzvah of Purim is to drink to the point that you're not halachically allowed to daven Maariv following. So if you drunk so much that it wouldn't be appropriate, then it would be like any other time. It's never appropriate to daven to Hashem when one is too intoxicated to do so. So you're patur, you're exempt.
Right. Conversely, right? You could just fall asleep.
You could fall asleep. You could do that also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this?
Did we go through all of this already? Have you gone through the whole thing?
We've gone through most of it.
I love, he says in, with regarding Maariv, you have two options.
Yeah.
Right? And in the case of community shul-based Seudah Purim, case of Seudah Purim at home, he says singing Kabbalat Shabbat with everyone seated at the table when leading Dush.
Yeah,
are we able to do that as a shul?
That leads to lots of other shul politic questions.
So that's why he's saying it specifically for like at home you could do whatever you want.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And again, so this happened during the year of COVID. So there was a lot of family seudas happening and not shul happening.
Right.
We can table that for a different time. One more thing I wanted to add is that there are people who, for whatever reason, want to be with a different group of friends for Purim Seudah. Toby's going to be working at school. They're going to have a meal at the school. So she's not necessarily needing a Purim Seudah later in the day, but it is nice to have a Shabbos meal together with the community. So what happens if someone's already fulfilled their obligation for a Purim Seudah but would like to join together to the shul with the shul for a Shabbos meal? Can you do that, right? Is this meal but defined as a Purim meal that it's, so if one's already fulfilled their Purim Seudah, there might be issues with consuming and starting a meal so close to Shabbos, which isn't a mitzvah meal. But once Shabbos has begun, there's nothing that says someone can't join you for the Shabbos meal, even if you've already begun the meal, right? We've all had situations where guest comes late or whatever. So if there are people that are joining post davening, post the break in the meal, they're starting the meal. This is their starting point. So they have a full obligation for Kiddush and Hamotzi. They can certainly say those brachot for others to listen to, right? And that, so that's also a unique twist in the communal setting, which it's very likely, which isn't necessarily going to be the case if one is at home with their family for the whole time, but it's very likely that even if you've had your hamotzi, had some wine prior to the onset of Shabbos, that there will be someone there that can do it. And there, again, it's totally appropriate. It's required for them to say those brachot, and there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't say them out loud and allow others to listen. Someone saying Kiddush al hayayin because they need to have yayin, but I don't need yayin because I already had wine. Well, I can still be yotze with their bracha of Mekadesh Shabbat. And I'll just add again, not that this is here nor there, but all poskim agree, almost all poskim agree, that women are fully obligated in the mitzvah of Kiddush at nighttime, to the point that not only can they, but if it's a situation like we just described, where there's a woman who's coming later, right? I gave the example of my wife Toby, who's going to be at school and having a suda with her students. She absolutely can fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush on behalf of a man. Women and men are absolutely equally obligated in the mitzvah of Kiddush on Friday night. Shabbos daytime is a bit more of a discussion, but there's absolutely no issue with the woman saying Kiddush on behalf of the broader community. Hamotzi, there's no question about Hamotzi, right? The woman can say the bracha of Hamotzi and pass it around, and everyone can eat from that. So that's another interesting twist if you're doing this in a communal setting. Okay, we're past 9 o'clock, so I know it's late.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm happy to
That's a
answer. I'm happy to answer any other questions on this if anyone needs to sit with it. The email I sent out last week before Shabbos had a link to Rabbi Linzer's write-up. It's in the source sheets here. It's on the Yeshiva Chovevei Torah website. It is fun to be able to do these unique and not so commonly practiced halachic options. And I think that this really does strike a nice balance when you're trying to, I'll say what another school of thought says, that this tension highlights what we often take for granted, which is the importance of Erev Shabbos and making sure that our Erev Shabbos is structured in a way to enhance our Shabbos experience. So some might take that to mean, this is emphasis that we need to always ensure we have a proper Shabbos meal, and so therefore you don't want to eat your Purim Suda in a way that's going to interfere with it. There is that school of thought, but the other school of thought says, no, this is a very cool, nice way to bring together two mitzvot and to find a way to be hopefully maximally inclusive of a broader community and allow people to come together in this way. So that being said, registration on the shul website is open for our Poris Mapa Seuda. I was at another gathering of rabbis this week, and it was nice. Shuls all over the country are doing this, and it seems to be this is becoming a nice way to, in a common way, in a more widely accepted way, that people are doing their Purim Seuda, having a nice Shabbos communal experience as well. And I hope to see some of you with us in shul next. Well, not this week. I mean, this week also I left to see in shul, but
yeah.
But for the Seuda in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
I have one point I want to make.
Yeah.
There was a lot of disturbing background noise. And I think that's because somebody had their mic on, and all they have to do is turn it off, and then there won't be that disturbing background noise.
I mean, I think we muted some people as we got it. But if anyone's ever, you should, if there's background noise, the square of the person the noise is coming from should light up, so you can, I don't think anyone takes offense at this stuff anymore. So if we can try to manage that if you were hearing things you can let us know that you're hearing it, and we can try to address it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. If anyone has questions after you've had some time to think about it, I'm happy to discuss it further.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
You too. Thanks for all of this. Wow.
All right. How do we stop this now?
The TV is not working.
Ah, that's strange.